Please hang up and try again.
Hi there, welcome back to 19 Considerations. It's been a little while since I last recorded a video, mainly because there's been a lot of information coming in over the last couple of weeks, and it's really a chance to step back and collate that and look at some of that and just see where the trends are pointing in relation to COVID-19 coronavirus, and really see if anything new is starting to appear. So the original premise, if you've looked at the previous videos, has been very much that the traditional approach, the Hygeia approach, the archetypal approach of Hygeia, which is maintenance of the body's own innate immunity, its physiology, its robustness, is and always will be a preferable approach than always searching for a panacea, which has been the focus of modern medicine, certainly for the past century at least anyhow, very much to the detriment of all other approaches to healthcare. And the medicine as an institution has very jealously guarded its territory and gained as much new territory as possible, really marginalising any other approach. And this sort of medical industrial complex is very much engaged in the same sort of behaviour at the moment, whereby it's trying to claim the entire landscape of the intellectual arguments and the approaches, and therefore rapaciously gather to itself all resource with the hope or with the promise of cure, as always. And it's just been interesting to see how the trend within the mainstream media, the pumping up the hope of a vaccine, and then even 2 days ago, the notorious Dr. Fauci himself even said that there may be a chance that a vaccine for this coronavirus will not be forthcoming, which is not surprising to anyone that's been paying attention. The fact that there's never been a successful vaccine for a coronavirus ever developed, and the previous SARS vaccine for SARS-1 based upon the spike protein proved to be absolutely fatal once there was re-exposure to the wild SARS virus. So the hope, the hangout hope, the little unicorn at the end, or the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, the unicorn, whatever you want to use, the fantasy that to try to keep people going, to keep people mollified and pacified during this sort of quarantine lockdown period, that narrative may be starting to fall apart. And so what are we left with? And what information has come in? And so one of the things that I and many other people have discussed are simple things like vitamin D levels. So it's known physiologically the role that vitamin D plays in the body and in the immune system in general. And so you can take that information in principle and you can make extrapolations based upon this particular case, which can then be put to the test. So we now have studies out of South Asia, Indonesia, Belgium and Switzerland, which indicate that levels of vitamin D of about around the 25 to 30 nanogram to milliliter range are protective. They reduce the duration and severity of the disease once contracted, and the Switzerland study starts to indicate the fact that those sorts of levels of vitamin D are actually protective against the disease. This is information which it hasn't gained the publicity that maybe it should. And you have to ask the question why. And I think medicine, yet again, as part of culture, is providing a really good test case for to illuminate these structural deficiencies within our culture, which are constantly being plastered over in this attempt to go back to normal or to maintain normal. Adam Curtis, in his documentary Hypernormalization, makes a host of fantastic points, and I'll link that below. But he looks very much at the role of politics, this idea that politics, as opposed to driving the human race and culture forward, has now has no answers, and for a while has had no answers, no positive view of the future, and all that can be done is that status quo can be managed, and that's as far as anything goes. And I think that's very, very similar with, in medicine and in all parts of culture. So to reiterate that vitamin D supplementation is certainly, I think, indicated for people. In the UK, there's a newspaper article that appeared in The Guardian a couple of days ago pointing out the fact that the disease seems to be adversely affecting the poorest boroughs in the country, and also a disproportionate number of black and Middle Eastern origin people. So what we're looking at there classically again are the basic foundations: nutritional health and vitamin D levels. So if you're up here at this latitude, we're about 53 degrees north here, you're not synthesizing vitamin D at all between April and September. And then, you need to expose a considerable amount of flesh to sunlight to synthesize vitamin D. If your skin is more pigmented or melanized, then you're going to be synthesizing even less. And so, again, it's no surprise that people of poor nutritional status living in crowded housing and with low vitamin D levels because of genetic factors and cultural factors of remaining covered or sun avoidance are getting disproportionately sick. So the evidence for vitamin D is mounting and looking good. And as a national policy, would it not be intelligent to roll out tests for vitamin D levels and supplementation, all of which is relatively cheap as compared to some of the more pie-in-the-sky ideas, or billions spent on a vaccine which may or may not work, and who knows how long the antibodies to that would last. And we need to operate under the assumption that this disease, this virus, isn't going anywhere, it is endemic, and therefore what do we do to protect ourselves? We invest in the robustness of our own physiology. As with the plague of Athens, which I mentioned in the first video, the cult of hygeia, which is this investment in physiology and hygienic practice and the foundations of health, came to the fore after the plague of Athens, which decimated the population there. And again, it makes sense if you're thinking about building a structure, a pyramid. What are you going to do first? You lay a stable foundation. Your panacea, your one-hit wonders, your one cure for one disease, occupy the apex and are very, very effective at certain times. But without a foundation, a physiological foundation, a nutritional foundation, there is nothing. You can't build a pyramid point up. It comes from the base, and the base is what needs to be built to be more robust. Just very quickly, I wanted to read a little bit from this book here by Gabrielle Herzberger called The Fundamentals of Homotoxicology. And she says, conventional medicine essentially applies scientific methodology to the diagnostic process. Typically similar symptoms are observed in different patients, a coherent picture of the illness developed, and a syndrome or symptom complex is then described. Ultimately, the syndrome is divorced from any individual patient and becomes the standard for therapy. The illness is reduced to measurable parameters, and the patient plays a passive role. The goal of therapy is to eliminate symptoms. Once this is achieved, the patient is considered cured. Within limits, adverse effects are expected and tolerated. On the one hand, this shift has produced impressive results. On the other, analytical thinking has led to a dead end that its focus on single causes has proved incapable of explaining complex and dynamic disease processes. Thus, to find effective solutions to the problems of treating chronic illnesses, we have to increase our understanding of the dynamic interactions in biological systems, which, as information from the fields of cybernetics and open systems thermodynamics clearly demonstrates, are by no means linear, but highly interconnected and subject to a fluid state of biological balance. Which is to say that you can't divorce a disease process from a person, from the context to which they are embedded in, and that's the problem. One of the structural problems of medicine is this contextual loss. So that's just one example of, say, a structural problem of fragility. The fact that the over-focusing for a century now on singular cures, as opposed to focusing on a robust system that's able to meet and dynamically interact with and rebuff, microorganisms, and deal with disease processes, deal with internal restoration, That's been it's been to the detriment of that robust foundational piece. And we can extrapolate that out, and I think this current situation is very useful to do that. So food supply is another one. For years, people, including myself, have been banging on about food security, because in any biological system, its robustness, strength comes from flexibility and complexity. So monocultures are typically prone to disease or predation. You'll have to look at the locust swarms in North Africa and Sudan, across the Arabian Peninsula, all the way through now to Pakistan, to see that's the case, that an entire food crop can be wiped out through a singular agent. So food security is another issue that we're dealing, or that can be looked at afresh. So in the States as well, they're ploughing under crops because of the centralized, industrialized relationship with food production, food processing, food distribution. Everything has become, everything's built on a very fragile foundation. And when all the pieces work, just-in-time delivery and global distribution and so on and so forth can work, but there's no robustness in the system, and it takes very little to unseat the whole mechanism, and it comes tumbling down. And this is a major concern with the current crisis, this global challenge that we're facing. What will happen long term to food security, food production, food distribution? And these are very real problems that we may be facing within the next few months. And I sincerely hope not, but I am concerned that that we will be. So as a nation, if we medicine, what can we do? Vitamin D testing, vitamin D supplementation. As a basic, farming, what can we do? Can we get away from monoculture of these low grade feed crops, and utilize some of that land to start to build food security for this area? It doesn't have to become food parochialism. We can still enjoy the fruits of interchange and exchange with other nations. But if that delicate mechanism is disturbed, then we have nothing to fall back on. Can we invest in local market gardening? When I grew up, there was a market garden. Well, it had just been changed from a market garden to a car park in central Cambridge. But the city itself had a market garden, and this was repeated up and down throughout this nation. It's all gone now. Market gardening is outsourced to Holland. That's where everything is done. But it's not a robust system. It has no flexibility in it. It has no ability to meet and adapt to shock and to retool. And although North America has a whole variety of growing zones and seasons, and is very fortunate in that way, its distribution is monolithic, colossal, incapable of change. So it's better to plough under crops. It's better to destroy tens, if not hundreds of thousands of animals, perhaps more, because they can't utilize the existing market. All of a sudden, those people who were eating at restaurants, what are they? They're no longer eating. No, they're eating at home, and you can't get the food to them. It just makes no sense. So I think across the culture, across our society, this situation gives us the opportunity to look at things, medicine and healthcare, public health. Can the investment move from billions toward panaceas for expensive vaccines for corporations to make billions out of, to can we actually really start to care for our own population? Can we start to drag people out of poor nutritional status? One of the prime indicators for lifelong mental and physical health problems is poverty and poor nutritional status. The two go hand in hand, okay? And again, through these lockdowns, we're having people in situations of depriving them economically, not supporting them nutritionally and physiologically, and a loss of control. These things are creating possibly a perfect storm for a second, third wave of this disease process to be even worse than the first. The last thing anybody wants to do, government included, is to set up a situation whereby the problems down the road are worse than they are currently. But that is a major concern. So what I would like to consider, for everyone to consider, is what are the structural, institutional bodies that are no longer functional? And are we going to be like medicine and just try and patch it up and move things on and keep going on as normal? Or are we going to take the opportunity and say, do you know what, that system doesn't work very well. It's not served us, beyond this point. We've reached a glass ceiling with this. What are the things that we can redo? Where can we retool? How can we have food security? How can we have nutritional security? How can we drag people out of poverty and lifelong chronic illness through policies? And it's a time for, I would hope, for politicians to lead as opposed to just mollify and placate, in the furtherance of their own political careers. Anyway, I hope there's some interesting things to consider there, and I'll see you all next time. All right, take care.